We are going to be talking about two kinds of approaches in play therapy. When I was in my graduate program, I was working part-time as a preschool teacher on the south side of San Antonio. And at that point in time, I'm enrolled in a marriage and family therapy program and just beginning to understand family systems and really not knowing anything about child development at that point. And so that began my, I won't even tell you how long now, journey of trying more and more to understand not just how do those kids become who they are even at that young of an age, but what do we do to help those kids that are on a trajectory in a dangerous direction to get them back on a healthier trajectory. And in the play therapy training that I had early on, not much was talked about what do we do with parents, other than leave them in the waiting room and talk to them periodically about what's going on. But I want to protect your child in this safe space so that I can understand what's going on with them. And as I became a parent, I was kind of offended by that philosophy. It's like, wait, who else needs to be involved in this kind of process besides the parents? Because this is who's raising them. This is who they're going home with. This is who needs more than anything to have the skills to be able to interact with this child in a meaningful way to help them through whatever it is that they're going through. So the family therapist in me started wanting to know more about how do we bring parents into this process? How do we respect them? How do we train them? How do we equip them to know how to help their kids through whatever struggles that they're having? Which led me to two distinctive approaches to working with kids, which we're going to talk about a little bit here. So I think one thing that's important to understand, though, when we're talking about play therapy and child interventions in general, is there is a wide spectrum of interventions, and the main line that I see on the axis of that spectrum is directedness. There's the child-centered, non-directive, purist side, which we'll talk about some of that too, that everything that happens in the play therapy process is what comes from the child, with a few exceptions around limits that we're going to set. But I'm not there to ask questions. I'm not there to make suggestions about what they play. I'm not going to guide it in any way. I'm viewing that play as like free association in a lot of ways, in which that philosophy did stem from Anna Freud's work with children. So it very much was seen as like free association for children. And then emerged into Virginia Axline, and then Gary Landreth, and the evolution into lots of other ways that things branched out. But on the other end of the continuum is the very directive approach with play therapy, where I'm structuring the process from a very intentional perspective. And there's a lot of things in between. In between there, I would put like Adlerian play therapy, which starts out fairly non-directive, and then once there's a conceptualization of what's going on for the child, then I identify activities and take the child to certain themes of activities. Cognitive behavioral play therapy is somewhere in the middle, maybe farther this way toward the directiveness. But there's, if you get one of the introductory books for play therapy, there's usually about 10 different models that are included in any of the textbooks, that have an overview. And you could plot them all kind of along that continuum and see a pretty wide range. And what struck me as I started learning more about that spectrum of directiveness is a lot of times if you go to play therapy conferences and listen to the academic debate and the theoretical debate about what you should be doing and how you should be working with particular kids, underlying that sometimes is an assumption that there's one right answer. And what I see, particularly as I became a parent, is that there's situations for parents where we need to be able to do both. There's times where I need to be able to follow my child and let them lead and join their play and let them have the experience of being in charge and the experience of directing me. And there's other times, maybe in the checkout line at H-E-B, where I need to be able to pick them up and direct their attention and engage them and calm them and take them somewhere they don't want to go, right? I need both. And I think when we talk about parenting skills and connecting that to play therapy, we have to be able to look at the full continuum of how we interact with parents and what kinds of skills we're teaching parents and what that looks like in their day-to-day life. Does that make sense? So part of what's different along that continuum is how they think about how change is produced. On the far end down here with the non-directive, child-centered approach, change happens because we've created a space for what's inside the child to come out. And that's all we have to do. It's a very Rogerian-rooted kind of philosophy that it's in there. I just have to create the environment where it can come out and just wait for it, which I love. On the other end of the spectrum, change happens by me creating experiences that the child would not create for themselves. If you have a fearful child, how do I get them to engage in a situation that is fearful to them other than guiding them through it and coaching them in a safe way for how to have that experience? Which, again, I think the more we look at this as not an either-or approach for how we work with kids, but more of a both-and, the more beneficial we are in how we understand the different ways that change happens. And particularly how many sessions you have with a child. Because this side might take a while. And I love Gary Landreth's line that some kids are like popcorn and some kids are like molasses. Molasses kids don't work very well in managed care, right? Because they don't do much in 6 sessions. I mean, it takes 6 sessions to establish a rapport in a non-directive kind of approach, which is why I don't like managed care. But that's a whole other conversation. So the last piece that's important to understand along that continuum is how parents are conceptualized. And I think that has evolved a lot in the last 10, 15 years as we've understood more and more through brain research and developmental research on how much touch and attachment and connection all play into child development, which we knew on some level. But the old, like 1950s, 1960s conceptualization that Virginia Axeline's work was built around assumed really that if we just got everybody out of the way and let kids be in a place where they could feel like they could take the lead, then healthy development would occur. And there's pieces of that connect to what we know about healthy development now, but there's pieces of it that don't connect to that. Healthy brain development comes from a lot of people around being very active in guiding where the child goes to. So there's a lot of ways that we've learned more about that. So in the early years, like I said before, parents were very much pushed out of the process, and really anywhere on the continuum, parents were not included. But more and more, we're understanding that parents have to be involved. We just need to figure out how. Because once you get the parents in the room, it really is a different dynamic to interact with kids too, right? So when we're talking about secure attachment, we're talking about a type of relationship experience where the child feels trust, connection, security. There's a consistent responsiveness that they experience with the caregiver. And what we know from all the developmental research that's been happening in the last 20, 30 years is that secure attachment is connected to self-regulation of the child, both physiologically, neurologically, movement, as if those are two separate things. They're not. Neurology is part of physiology. Social skills, identity development, how confident they are, assertiveness, resilience, all of these things are interconnected with the sense of secure attachment and predictability, attunement that this child has experienced with caregivers. And you can broaden it to teacher interactions, community, sense of safety. I mean, there's all sorts of layers of that, certainly. We know that attachment security is something that starts at birth, or I would even argue before birth, because there's hearing sounds and touch and the neurological, hormonal calmness that the baby feels from the mother even before they're born. And there's a lot of, I think, good news from this kind of research for parents, that you don't have to be perfect. Everybody's excited to hear that when they're a parent. It's a matter of adapting to your child's temperament. It's about the fit between the style that you have as a parent and the temperament that your child has, and being able to adapt. Anybody that's raised more than one child knows that what works with one doesn't necessarily work with the other. My kids have totally opposite personalities, and you think you have it figured out with one, and then the other one comes along and it's like, okay, well, that doesn't work this time. But it's all about the goodness of fit. And there's lots and lots of little moments that matter on a daily basis of what kind of connection is there, what kind of sense of security is there, what the touch of the parent means to the child, whether it's something that's comforting and regulating or something that's scary and disruptive. Even a parent coming up and just touching like that. Some kids would flinch from that, and others would just lean into it. And some of that's temperamental. Some kids just don't like to be touched as much. That might not be their love language so much. But an attuned parent is going to know what matters to that child and how to regulate them, and when they come home frustrated, after a day of school, what are the words to say? Is it touch that's needed? Is it a distraction? Is it let's sit down and talk? Is it do I need to make you laugh? There's all sorts of those little attunement pieces that happen on a day-to-day basis that really do get wired in so many different ways. And I already talked about the different manifestation in the parenting context of the times that we need to be directive and the times that we need to be more non-directive.